And we're here. I've finally made it all the way through the last 4 episodes of Percy Jackson and the Olympians on Disney Plus. And here's the thing. People say this show is not hard to follow. I disagree. I think this show is very hard to follow. I have to reiterate, in this video, I've never read the books. I don't have any context going into this. So everything that I'm trying to follow is me approaching this, just watching the show and hoping the show explains everything. Here's the determination that I've made, is that the show does explain basically almost everything, but the way they have to do it is they pack so much into every episode that it's just like, every 2 seconds there's like a pivotal piece of information that is absolutely critical. Just in episode 5 here, we'll cover episode 5 relatively quickly because there's not a heck of a lot that happens throughout this. So they decide they need to go to Santa Monica now. That's ultimately where the entrance to Hades' lair is. The entrance to the underworld is in Santa Monica. And I believe they get this information from Poseidon and his, siren. I think she's a siren. I don't know if they ever really put a name to this creature, but I believe it's a siren. Really quickly here, so as we're leaving the last episode, right? Percy he fell out of the St. Louis Arch, and then, they were attacked by Echidna and her, chimera-looking thing. And then he talks to Poseidon. Poseidon saves him, and then he talks to them. We leave Annabeth and Grover on the ground, and they're worried, and they're like, well, is he alive? And then they see him, but before that, they see the Fates, the 3 Fates, which are just old ladies, and they recognize them, and they cut a string. They stare at them and cut a string. Apparently that means someone is going to die. That's what they say. Somebody is going to die very soon. They kind of bring this up a little bit later, but I do have some questions about that whole thing. It just says someone's gonna die. We'll get to it. We're introduced to Ares. This is the first time I believe we've seen a god in person. Let me think. Oh, well, we have. Never mind. No, because we saw the Dionysus as a god, right? Yeah. Whatever. I forgot about that. So we have seen Dionysus, and he's just a dude. And we meet Ares here, and he's just a dude. He wants them to go to this abandoned amusement park called Waterland. I'm trying to just, go back in my brain to, this episode. There's so much that happens that it's all just crazy. Okay, so they go to Waterland, which is an abandoned amusement park. Well, first of all, I guess we meet Ares. He explains a bunch of stuff. Namely, he explains that all of the other children of Zeus, the other gods, are also after the Master Bolt. Everyone's been sent after the Master Bolt, and Ares doesn't believe that Percy stole the Master Bolt either. But the deal they make, and I can't recall if there was more to it than this. I'm sorry. But I believe the deal they make is just that Ares sends them to this Waterland amusement park because they have this shield. He needs his shield back. And it's there. We find out later why it's there. Can I get to that? Yeah, screw it. Yeah, we'll just jump a little bit ahead. We find out that the shield's there because at some point Ares was meeting with Aphrodite. Ares and Aphrodite have a thing. In this amusement park is apparently where they meet, and at that point the shield ended up there. And then it ends up in a golden statue. This amusement park, by the way, was built by Hephaestus. Important information. It was built by Hephaestus. And that's important because Aphrodite is Hephaestus' wife, but she's hooking up with Ares, apparently. Although there's no really... I don't know that there's real verification to that. It's just that I believe Annabeth, pieces that together. She's like, oh, this is... They were probably hooking up here, and that's why the shield's here. pretty sure that's how that information is given to us. It's not like I don't know. There's any verification of it, but I assume we can just believe that that's why it's there. That they are hooking up. I don't know. So yeah, let's go with that. We find out a couple things. So we see this is before they go to the park, right? We see Percy's stepfather is now on the news. He's talking about how bad a kid Percy is, basically validating this news story, which is actually a big deal. And it kind of gets buried a little bit in all of the other things that are happening. But, like, the truth of the matter is that because of the whole train situation in, like, episode 3, I think, and because of the big hole being blasted open in the St. Louis Arch, the police are now after this gang, this trio, okay? They're after Percy and Annabeth and Grover. And then the stepfather comes forward. I guess they're questioning him, and he comes forward and says, yeah, he's a bad kid. He did all that stuff. So now the police are, like, going to chase after them, which isn't super important for, like, the rest of the show or the rest of this season. But I do think, like, it's going to be important in later seasons. Like, I don't think this is a thread that's just going to kind of disappear. I definitely think it's going to be like, oh, Percy is now, like, he's like a wanted criminal, so he has to go into hiding. He's gonna have to go into hiding for most of this, right? It's just it feels like it's kind of just thrown out there as like a little extra thing, and there's nothing really comes of it. But I do feel like it is important. Ares also says that Zeus wants a war, no matter what, and it seems like, you know, everybody knows that. This is just what the gods do. They just have wars for fun. It just happens. And that Zeus doesn't really care who stole the vault. None of this matters. It's all just like means to an end. They're just trying to find whatever reason they can to create a war. So one of the notes that I wrote for this episode was just a simple question. Why does Ares need them to get the shield? Like, why couldn't he just get the shield himself? I believe the reasoning for it, I don't think it's explained exactly in the episode. There's a lot there. I mean, obviously, Ares is, like, they don't like, he's not supposed to be there, and he obviously has a very bad relationship with Hephaestus, and this is a park built by Hephaestus, and the last time he was here was when he lost the shield in the first place. So there's a lot of reasons for him to just be like, well, I shouldn't probably be doing this. And I think the other thing is possibly the final trial of this, or just the trial. I guess there's kind of like two trials. I guess there's the gate where they have to kind of push their way through, and then I don't recall there being much else except for the statue itself. The way the statue works is one person has to sit in the seat, and then the other person has to, like, turn them into gold. Like, the other person gets the shield. So one person basically has to sacrifice themselves, and the other person will get the shield. So that's kind of the trap, or whatever. So I think that's, like, another reason we could say that Ares couldn't do this by himself, obviously, because you need two people for that. We learned that celestial bronze... the gate's made of celestial bronze, and then there's some sort of mechanism that's made of celestial bronze. And when they go through the turnstile to get into the park... By the way, Waterland, it's just an abandoned amusement park. It was built by Hephaestus. I don't know that there's much else to it other than that. It's just there's no big people there. And I think it is just supposed to be a trial for demigods. I don't know if it has much purpose other than, like, holding the shield. Like, the shield is there, but, like, how long's it been there? I don't know. Like, is it always, like, Hephaestus is there, and we meet Hephaestus here. And then there's also the whole tunnel of love thing where they go through. Well, this tells the story of Hephaestus, and I believe they also say this is where they would find. I guess this is just a small part of it, because they do say this is where Ares and Aphrodite probably would have gone, and this is probably this tunnel of love is probably where Ares lost the shield, I guess. So there's a lot of questions we could ask about the amusement park, but I'm just gonna, like, move past it, right? So we do learn, when they go through the turnstile to get into the park, she says something about the celestial bronze, like there's this trap. This trap thing is made of celestial bronze, she says specifically, and it passes through humans. Like, it won't hurt human beings, but it will hurt gods. It'll hurt monsters or demigods. Specifically is what she said. I made sure to write that down verbatim. And then the question came up, does it hurt gods, though? Because she doesn't say gods. She says monsters and demigods. I'm like, okay. So it does it, like, it seems important, the fact that they leave out the term gods, but whatever. We also find out the Percy sword is made of this, if we didn't already know that. I'm pretty sure I didn't know that, but yeah, Percy sword is made of this specific metal. And so on the point of whether or not it can harm gods, we do see in the fight later on in episode 8, I believe it was the 8th episode, we see Percy cut Ares with it, so I do believe it does harm gods as well. So that's just a little extra fact, not to get too ahead of myself, but I believe that somewhat answers that question, that yes, it does hurt gods as well, maybe not as badly. So at the end of this, basically what happens is Percy gives up his life, he gets turned to gold, and then Annabeth's real sad about it, and she thinks he's real cool, and she gives this big speech about how he's better than all of the other demigods. He's a hero. Nobody else would have given up their life like him. He's a good dude. And she appeals to Hephaestus, who decides to let Percy go. Now this is interesting because part of the whole thing here was the fates and the string, and they cut the string saying somebody's gonna die, which I believe they bring back up in this scene, and they say, well, one of us is gonna die, and this was like what it was referring to as the one of them being turned into gold, but he immediately gets turned back. So I don't know if that was supposed to mean, like, that's what the string being cut referred to, was Percy being turned into gold and kind of dying, I guess. He didn't really die, but nobody else dies, so I don't know what else it could be referring to. We find out once they bring the shield back, they give it to Ares, and Ares is like, alright, I'll help you get to Hermes. We find out Hermes is in a casino in Vegas, so they need to go to Vegas to meet Hermes. And then Hermes will be able to get them to Santa Monica, hopefully, is the idea. So, at the end of this episode, and here's a big point. Here's a big point for me, okay? Is like, there's a scene here that would in any other show be completely, like, throwaway, like, okay, whatever. And it's the point at which Ares throws him a backpack, and he says, here, there's food, clothes, and then the last thing he says is drachmas for summoning Hermes. And I guess the only reason I remembered this whole thing was because of how much it stands out that he said drachmas for summoning Hermes. That stood out as a line to me. But in any other show, I'm like, a character throwing another, like, a backpack and being like, here, food, clothes, and money. It's like, you know, it wouldn't be like a super memorable moment. You know, it's just like a line where you're like, okay, yep, they've got some supplies. But this moment actually ends up being incredibly pivotal. This backpack is super important to the rest of the plot. And it's just kind of like tossed to him, and it's like a 2-second scene. Being tossed like a little backpack. And the only thing that we think significant would come from this backpack is these drachmas for summoning Hermes. Anyways, they go in this truck, which is like a livestock truck, and this is going into episode 6. And this truck is supposed to take them all the way to Vegas, and that's the whole thing. They're going there to meet Hermes. Percy has a dream at the beginning of this episode, and the first thing, we're supposed to, in the moment, think that this is Hades talking to the lightning thief, and blah, 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 and Percy seeing him in his dream, and then that person, like, acknowledges him that he's being watched in his dream. He's like, it's not time for us to meet yet. So the characters are assuming a lot, which turns out to none of this turns out to be true. But there is a lot of assumptions being kind of thrown around here. They assume that's Hades, which turns out is not true. The second thing is, for some reason, they assume that Clarisse is the lightning thief because she's mean to Percy at camp, I guess. And she's also, it's also because she's Ares' daughter. And for some reason, they assume... Oh, sorry. God, I didn't write this down. Damn. See, this is why I miss stuff and forget stuff. It's because at the end of episode 5, like, Grover's like, I think I figured out, Ares is hiding something, and I think I figured out what it was. And it turns out that Grover assumes that Ares is the one to have stolen the lightning because he just got, like, a weird feeling from him. He, like, says something about, like, oh, well, you know, it must suck that everyone thinks Athena stole the lightning, like, it must suck, you know, if, like, you were really the one to do that. And then from that whole thing and Ares making a weird face, Grover assumes that Ares must have been the one to take the lightning. Which turns out to technically actually be somewhat true, I guess. But the reasoning is flawed. Yeah, but it is technically true, but there's flaws, and there's more we learn about this later. Okay, so they use this weird, like, portable wishing well. I wrote this down because I thought it was a really weird thing that they do. They throw, like, a coin in this, like, weird portal thing, and it allows them to talk to Luke. And so they're talking to Luke, and they're communicating with Luke, and it turns out that Percy decides that, hey, Clarisse is probably the lightning thief, because if we know Ares stole the bolts, then Clarisse is a daughter of Ares, and she's also just really mean to me. So she's probably the one that stole the lightning, I guess. In this scene, Percy gets cut off before being able to tell Luke that they're going to see Hermes, and we find out a little bit more about Luke and his relationship to Hermes. Kind of throughout this episode, there's little drops and pieces kind of given to us all over the court. This episode was like one of the worst for me to watch, I'll be honest. It was so much information that was just being, like, scattered throughout this episode, and it made me have to rewind so many times to, like, make sure I got all this information. So we learn that Luke's mom is a seer, which is basically, like, a human that can, like, see the future. She can see through the mist, which means she can see, like, monsters and stuff. We learn all of that information, I guess. And we learn that Luke doesn't have a very good relationship with his father, and when they talk to Hermes later, which, remember, they're going to meet Hermes, we learn something. I will be honest, that whole scene, I think the end of this episode, I get really tired of rewinding all the time, and so the information I have might be a little bit flawed. But if I remember correctly, Luke blames Hermes for the loss of his... They use, like, very vague terminology. She says something like, Luke blames Hermes for what happened to his mother, which doesn't imply death, necessarily. It's a weird wording if you're, like, for his mother... Like, if you would say for his mother's death, but, like, for what happened to his mother means anything could have happened to his mother. I don't know if that is supposed to imply that she died, but we also learn, I believe, that it has something to do with Hades, I think, in the underworlds. I believe that, like, Hermes says something like, oh, I've helped a lot of people get into the underworlds, but nobody's ever made it out alive. Like, it's always gone badly. And he says, I believe he says something about how, like, it's what ruined his relationship with Luke's mother. It had something to do with, like, them being in the underworld. I don't know, man. It's a lot of information that, like, I think it was something like that, but, like, a lot of vague information, which was just nothing to go off of, so, yeah, whatever. Something happened to Luke's mother, and Hermes had something to do with it, and they try to use that against Hermes so that, like, help us, Hermes, so you can repair your relationship with Luke. Like, you helping us, that'll do big things for you. Which I also was wondering, like, why... I mean, obviously Luke's mother would be really special to Hermes, but, like, in particular, like, there's a lot of sons of Hermes, you know, which means a lot of kids were born, in, you know, relatively recently, I think. So, like, would any of these parents be particular, like, what, these current parents are of particular value to the gods when they're, like, producing kids constantly and they're immortal, and, you know, all throughout the years, this most recent relationship, this one was really special, like, you know, like, this is the one that he really cares about. They're just kind of assuming that, aren't they? You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I can see it, it's possible, and the fact that she's a seer maybe makes her more special, more interesting, but, you know, it's just, I'm questioning it a little bit there. And by the way, this whole scene, this whole thing takes place, they show up at this place called the Lotus Casino, right? Well, they know the name of the casino, and the way they find it is because it looks like a big lotus flower. They're like, oh, that's the Lotus Casino. And then they tell this story about how, like, in the Odyssey, the characters in the Odyssey started eating lotus flowers, and then they started losing their memories. And they're like, well, so we gotta be careful and not eat anything in the casino because we'll start to lose our memories, which is the whole thing. And then they split up. Percy and Annabeth go together, and then Grover goes off on his own. The reason they split up this way is because Percy's like, well, I've never seen Hermes, and you guys have. You guys have seen Hermes before. So I wouldn't recognize him, which makes perfect sense. But the one thing that I do want to bring up here is the idea of these drachmas that Ares gives them, right? Ares gives him a bag. In the last episode, he said, here's drachmas for summoning Hermes. And I specifically went back to make sure I didn't, like, mistake the name. That he said, like, oh, these are drachmas for summoning somebody else. It's like, no, he specifically says for Hermes. And so my question is, why did he say that? They don't use the drachmas to summon Hermes at all. I don't even think it, like, so much matters that they have the drachmas. It's like, oh, Hermes will show up so long as you have these drachmas. Like, I don't know. And then if that's the case, then it doesn't even make sense that they split up in the first place, because only one of the groups could have the drachmas. And then even when they go and talk to him, it's like they don't even bring up the drachmas at all. So I don't know what that whole line's about, man. What is he talking about the drachmas for summoning Hermes? They don't use them for that. So I don't know why they said that. I don't understand. But anyways, the other thing is Augustus is a character. I wrote his name down specifically. Augustus is a satyr that we meet, the only other satyr other than the one that was, like, frozen in stone in Medusa's house. But Augustus is eating chips, and so Grover assumes, hey, you're eating lotus flowers, and that's making you forget stuff. Turns out that that's not what's happening, and instead, Grover also starts forgetting stuff. He seems to forget stuff at a much higher rate. He seems more susceptible to it. I believe they, oh, right. They do explain this, actually, at the end, which I wrote down because I was like, why does he lose more memory? They say he loses more memory because he was alone. Which is just like, oh, they're, you know, Percy and Annabeth were I guess they were more able to hold on to remembering because they were with each other, and so they have those like anchor points, whereas Grover didn't have, like, an anchor point to, like, remind himself. You know, if the presence of another human being that he you know, would allow him to remember that human being if they're just there. You know, and that makes sense. But there's this whole thing about how, like, Augustus is like, oh, I found Pan. Well, I found him. I'm very close to finding him, but I need your help. And so they go off. And this is when Annabeth and Percy talk to Hermes. They have a discussion with him, blah, blah, blah. And he refuses to help them. Now, again, I stopped rewinding by the end of this episode because I'd just been doing it. I said that already. So my recollection of these events is a little bit iffy. But here's what I believe. So Hermes says, no, I'm not going to help you. And then what happens is Annabeth uses her invisibility, like, she leaves, and then she comes back, but invisible. And then I believe she steals something. I'm think what she stole was the keys. I could be wrong about this, but the keys to Hermes' taxi. And then they go, this is why they go to the parking garage, because that's the only thing that makes sense, really. I think it was the keys, but I've, didn't write it down, and I maybe didn't. It was really confusing anyways, because they end up getting this letter. So it turns out that Hermes found out that they did that, and then he leaves a note allowing them to leave anyways, which I don't know what else that had inside it, if it had the keys, whatever. I don't know, man. Like I said, this episode is really hard to follow, and so there was a point at which it was just like, screw it. Just gonna hope I gleaned enough information. And I am confident that even if I do miss stuff at this point, I'm pretty sure the show did explain it. I just missed it. It explains stuff. It's just, there's so much explanation. It's it's exhausting to watch this show. I went from watching Echo, man, which Echo is a super easy show to follow because it's not that complicated. There's not all this lore and tidbits of information being thrown at you every 2 seconds. You have to just remember something 5 minutes from now is not going to make any sense at all. So then there's the whole search for Pan thing, because they have to go find Grover. Okay, so it turns out that the Lotus Casino, actually, it's not the chips. It's not actually the Lotus Flight. It's the casino itself that makes people forget. I don't know if I said that already. I'm pretty sure I didn't. But that makes my previous comment kind of make no sense when I said, why does Grover forget more when he's alone? It's because they're all actually forgetting stuff constantly, because the casino itself makes everybody forget. I don't really know why, but it does do that. This is pivotal because it means that they miss the due date of the quest because they spend too long in the casino. I'm not going to try to make too much sense of when they lost time. We could get caught in a whole loop going around that, but they lose time, and they lose a lot of time in this casino just because apparently they're just forgetting things over and over again. And then they find Grover because they need to leave, and they find Grover at the VR section. And it turns out that whatever game he was playing was some game to do with finding Pan, I think, which was what Augustus was referring to. I believe Grover says, oh, I almost found Pan. I was so close. But yeah, it's this whole thing that goes to explaining why Augustus thought he was finding Pan. It's this, whatever this game is. We don't get to see the game, but that's what's happening in the game apparently. And then a whole thing happens where they get in the taxi, which again, I don't really fully understand. Hermes lets them in the taxi, even though he said he wasn't gonna help them. He does help them because Annabeth stole something off of him, which I believe was the car keys. And then he leaves them a letter. He's like, "Oh, you scamps. Well, I guess I can't stop you. So here's all the information you need to go." I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I don't know. I could be wrong. But that's what happened. And then Percy starts driving the taxi, and he's real bad at driving. And then the taxi just teleports to the ocean. They drive out of the parking lot, and they're about to get hit by a truck, and then they just teleport to the ocean. I guess that's just what Hermes' truck, thing does. I guess that's what it just does that. I don't know. It's very possible it just does that. And I believe the ocean that they go to specifically is also the beach by the, that vacation home that they go to in episode 1. The beach house, right? And I'm only thinking that because I'm connecting it with the later scenes in this season where they go back to that beach. I was like, it was probably the same beach. Maybe it's not, maybe it was, I don't know. Why would they go to a different beach? But they go to this beach so that they can, they talk to, Poseidon, and then, or they talk to the siren. Again, I'm pretty sure this is a siren. They talk to her, and she's like, you failed your quest, so you can give up. And he's like, I'm not going to give up. We're going to stop this war. And she's like, you're just like your father. And then she gives him 4 pearls, to return to the ocean. She says that's what they do. They return to the ocean from the underworld. So they can use them to return specifically to this spot, I assume, or just the ocean in general. That's what she says, the ocean, but I'm assuming it's this spot. So they got 4 pearls. Give them 4 pearls for the 3 of them and the mother. I'll bring the mother back. Okay. I'm sorry if I missed a lot in this episode. This is the only place where I could see myself having missed a lot of like little minor details that I just didn't. I didn't want to rewind. Like, no. I spent way too long sitting and watching this singular episode that I just was like, no, I'm not gonna pause and rewind every couple of seconds. I have a cat. And my cat is very distracting a lot of the time. She'll come up and start playing with something. You know, it's like don't knock that off. You know, she was being very distracting this episode. Anyway, I shouldn't make excuses. Okay, episode 7. I guess this is in Santa Monica. The door to the underworld is in the office of this bed salesman guy. Actually, now that I think about it, like when they go to that beach, that's way back in New York. You know, that's like a beach in New York. So that wouldn't make sense for them, or else they would have just traveled all the way back to square one, right? So I assume no. Okay, so they must have gone to like it must have just taken them to Santa Monica, I guess, just a beach in California. That actually makes more sense. Or else that would have been kind of ridiculous if they just like got sent back to New York. I mean, unless they just now have the capability to like use this car to get wherever they want, but that doesn't seem like that's what happened. It seemed like it took them to San Francisco is the whole point. Whole reason they went to find Hermes in the first place. So, yeah. So, I guess they're going to Santa Monica, and now they're in the underworld in the office of bed salesman guy. I didn't write down this guy's name. It started with a P. I didn't want to like look it up and be like, what the hell? What are they saying when they say this guy's name? I didn't feel like doing that. So it starts with a P. We find out that he like uses these beds to like trap people and then like send them in the underworld or something. I don't remember. But he's also a son of Poseidon, we find out. I don't think he's a demigod. I think he's just a god. But he's just a god that's also a son of Poseidon. I mean, that'd be really weird if he was also a forbidden child that was just like out here and nobody talks about this guy ever. He's some sort of god, but I don't know. There's a lot of flashbacks in episode 7, which these just start coming out of nowhere. There's a lot of stuff like that where the episode just starts throwing flashbacks into random... Like, the next episode puts in a bunch of flashbacks to camp that we didn't see for some reason. But this is a bunch of flashbacks to Percy's childhood. And the first thing we find out is that Percy gets kicked out of school a lot. There is a term that is used here that says Percy has learning differences. I don't know how much I'm supposed to read into that as like... You know, but or if it's just to refer to the fact that he gets kicked out. Like, from what we know about Percy and why he gets kicked out of school, it's mostly because, like, we get the one story, which is that he sees, like, a Pegasus on a rooftop, and then he climbs out a window onto the roof, and he gets kicked out of school for doing that. Which is like, okay, even if you're seeing shit all the time, there's, like, no reason I can think of for a reasonable human child to be like, oh, it's probably cool if I just climb out this window and stand on this rooftop. That's like, it's not, obviously don't do that. Like, most kids know better than to do that. That's just a pretty dumb thing to do. They say learning differences. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but if there is some sort of, psychological thing, this could also go to explain why Percy has trouble making friends, although at the same time, we were also given the explanation that he has trouble making friends because he sees a bunch of mythological stuff, and, like, he tries to tell people about them, and they think he's weird. So that's why he wasn't able to make friends also. I don't know, man. I don't know what that's supposed to mean exactly. I was very happy with myself for remembering the drachmas, because when they get to the underworld, they take the drachmas out of the backpack, and they start giving them to Sharon. They're like, Sharon, sorry. I don't want to say anything too close, because there's a character called Chiron, I have no idea how that's spelled, but this is Sharon, the boatman on the River Styx. He's supposed to take them to Hades, but he refuses to do that. They try to hand him some drachmas, but it doesn't work. So these drachmas seem to have absolutely no purpose, but at least I know where he got them from. And then Fluffy from Harry Potter. No, it's Cerberus, obviously, the guardian of the underworld, the big three-headed dog. It shows up, starts chasing them, and it eats Grover. This episode was actually pretty fun because there's not a lot of information. It's just stuff happening. It was just action, mostly. And I was like, thank God I don't have to write so many things down. Thank God, after the last episode. Yes, like, I hope they're running from this dog for like 20 minutes, man. It's just like, half the episode is just them running from this dog, man. Fluffy eats Grover, and then there's this whole thing of them, I don't know, they stop the dog somehow. There's like a ball that they throw, and then the dog spits out Grover. There's a line about how Grover loses his pearl. So apparently the dog swallowed Grover's pearl conveniently and fell out of his pocket, which would be important information, and is, but also isn't at the same time. I definitely wrote it down thinking it was going to be super important. It turns out to not really be that important at all. But the whole problem with this is, like, they only have 3 pearls now, which the 4th pearl was to take the mother out of the underworld. So, well, what are they going to do now? They can't take the mother home unless somebody stays behind. So, who knows? But nothing ever really comes of that, so don't even worry about it. Then there's the Forest of Regrets. I don't even know if that was what it's called. That's just what I wrote. That's just what I wrote here. I called it the Forest of Regret. Gets Annabeth. Apparently she has a lot of regrets, and so she ends up like starting to freeze in this forest as they're walking through it. And so she has to bail out of the underworld, so she eats her pearl and leaves. She bails. Annabeth's gone after this point. So there are 2 pearls left, keep in mind, and Grover and Percy are together. Then we get to this point where there's a big hole in the ground, and suddenly the shoes that Grover is wearing start getting pulled into this hole, which an explanation as to why this happens does not come until episode 8. So don't get me wrong, I was very confused by this whole thing. Doesn't get explained until the next episode why that happened. And at the end of this episode is when we even get explained what this hole is. It's just like, what is this hole? And I kind of thought that it was just like a hole that pulls in artifacts from gods, magical artifacts, and that's why it's pulling in that. That's why possibly, as we find out, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I don't know. That's what I thought initially, and that's what I assumed until we got to episode 8, where it's actually explained that that's not what's going on. But at the end of this episode, that's what I thought was going on. It's not true, okay? But here's the weird thing. Okay, so they let the shoes go, and the shoes fly into the big hole. So these are Hermes shoes that they get from Luke in episode 1, okay? Important. Episode 2. Sorry. It would have been episode 2, I think. Or 3. Could have been 3, but I think it was 2. 2's the camp episode. No, it's probably episode 3, because episode 3 is when they leave the camp. Right? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But here's the thing, okay? Is they find the master bolt. Like, Percy lands on the bolt, and they find it. And it turns out that the master bolt is in this backpack, or in this bag. I believe that's what they're saying. It was in this backpack that Ares gave to Percy. Now this brings up a whole host of questions, and I think this is the most pivotal thing that I don't understand, okay? The most important thing that doesn't really make much sense to me is, A, if the Master Bolt was in this backpack the whole time, how did they never notice that until just now? Or like they've been digging through that thing. They literally had food in it for the trip, for this drive that they took from Missouri to Nevada, right? That's a long drive. It was supposed to have food in it for the trip. Did they not eat any of the food? Did they not open this bag? But I know they definitely opened the bag to get the drachmas out to give to Sharon. So I don't know how this just went undetected. The second thing, big thing, is why Ares would have given this to them. He didn't really need to do that. I mean, I also feel like it's this huge assumption that Percy makes, but it kind of makes sense. It's like, if it's in the bag and Ares gave them the bag, it's like, oh, Ares must have been the one to give it to us. But it doesn't make any sense why Ares would give them the Master Bolt, because it only really helps them at this point to have it. You know? Like, it doesn't benefit, like, it's only better for them that they have it. Like, if he keeps it from them, that's worse for them. I don't know what he's trying to, like, do here. I don't understand the intention there. Is it like, oh, he brings it to Hades, but Hades doesn't even want the Master Bolt? As we find out, he talked to Hades. Hades is like, I want my helmet, which you stole. I don't want the Master Bolt. And he only wants the Master Bolt once they figure out this whole other thing, which we'll get to. Why did Ares give him the Master Bolt? What benefit was that? I don't understand. It's like, it's just so they could further implicate Percy in having stolen it through Zeus. But Zeus, like, their whole goal was to get the Master Bolt from the underworld. So if he's in the underworld and he has the Master Bolt, at this point, it doesn't even implicate him further, because it's just like, oh, well, I got it from the underworld. I don't get that. I don't understand that. I don't know what the hell the whole deal with that was, except to just... And this is the point in the plot where Percy has to have the Master Bolt, and obviously Hades doesn't have it, because Ares stole it, which is what we assume, what Grover assumes, which is true. I don't know, man. Oh, also, I wanted to mention from that episode where, like, Grover's talking to Ares, I was being very convinced, because there's this the whole part of the prophecy was that one of Percy's friends is going to betray him. And I was like, well, Annabeth she's getting way too close to Percy, way too inspired by him. Like, she's going through this whole arc where she's like, oh, Percy's the best. He's so cool and a hero and whatever. And I was like, I think Grover's going to be the one that betrays him in the end. And so I honestly thought from the whole Ares exchange, you know, where Grover's like, I'm actually a fan of you, Ares, that this was some sort of weird underlying thing. We're going to learn out that Grover is actually weird and evil and working for somebody else, and he was trying to, like, pin it on Ares and make them think that Ares is the actual thief. And I also thought, at this moment, the way that the Master Bolt just ends up in the bag somehow, out of nowhere, I'm like, maybe it's not Ares, maybe this is Grover, who's trying to implicate Ares again. Grover put the Master Bolt in the bags, because he had the Master Bolt the whole time. But I don't even think that's the case. The way this resolves is like we kind of get a definitive picture of who stole the bolts. So I'm very confused about that whole thing. The whole Master Bolt in the Ares bag. I don't know. I'm sure someone who read the books is like, oh, this is how this happened. But, like, I didn't read the books, man. This doesn't make any sense in the show. I don't understand how that makes any sense whatsoever. I wrote down, okay, so there's more flashbacks to Percy's childhood. And I love the flashbacks in this are so bizarre, because it's just Percy kind of just being an asshole to his mother. Just saying, like, horrible stuff to her while she's just trying to, like, he's getting kicked out of school, and she's like, I'm just trying to make this work, Percy. I'm just trying to get you into a school. And there's a point where she's like, she buys him ice cream, And she's like, all right, well, I gotta drop you off at the new school. It's gonna be okay, Percy. He's like, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to get rid of me? I would never do this to you. And then she like walks away, and she's like in tears. And I'm like, come on, like this kid, like this is not how you parent a child, okay? If you're letting your child say something to you that like gets to you that much, like that child's, you're spoiling the shit out of that child. You say to the child, you say, hey, you don't talk like that to me, you little shit. And you don't buy them ice cream. That's what you do. You don't go cry about it. I'm sorry, it's just bad parenting. The whole flashback scene, this is cut up into later on. We return to this scene, but let's skip it for now. So we find out that Hades actually wanted to talk to Percy because Hades thinks Percy stole the helm. He's like, oh, you probably stole the bolt, you probably stole the helm. It's like, I just want my helmet back. I don't care about anything else. That's why I have your mother. I'll give you your mother back if you give me back my helm. And Percy's like, what? I don't have your helm. We only have the Master Bolt. You don't want the Master Bolt? And he's like, no, I don't want the Master Bolt. And then Percy does this crazy, like, Jimmy Neutron brain blast at this point. he comes up with this crazy theory. He's like, it's Kronos he's the one that stole the lightning. It was Kronos the whole time. And let me tell you, when he said this, I was like, what are you talking about, dude? How do you even get to this decision? Although I do say it makes sense, because we find out that that big hole that the Hermes shoes flew into, that was Tartarus, the entrance to Tartarus, which at the bottom of which we know Kronos is. And so that's how Percy's able to put this all together, I guess. Kronos is the one he was hearing in his dreams. I guess part of it is that he literally saw the guy in his dreams, and he assumed it to be Hades, I think, at the time, but obviously it's not, because he's just met Hades. And the fact that somebody is stealing both Hades' thing and Zeus's thing, and he was given the mask, like, he somehow puts together that, oh, obviously this is Kronos doing this. Now, I will say, from my understanding of Greek mythology, Kronos is not a god. Kronos is a titan. But remember, a lot of the gods are birthed from titans. In my understanding of Greek mythology, a lot of it comes from God of War. Okay, so I remember Kronos, I believe, being the guy in God of War that's like wandering through the desert. And he's like this big titan. So far, we haven't seen any titans, and every god has just been a dude. So they never use the word Titan to describe Kronos in this, so I don't know if they're just kind of going to rewrite Kronos to not be a Titan if there's no such thing as Titans in this universe. I don't really know, or maybe it's implied by the fact that he's at the bottom of a big hole implies that he is a Titan, obviously, or else why would it be a giant hole? But he's supposed to be a Titan, okay? And they never say it. And I thought that was a little weird. So yeah, okay, so we've got this whole mystery down. We now know that Kronos, Ares is probably working for Kronos, and whoever was stealing the thing for Ares, which we assume at the time was Clarice, because she's a daughter of Ares, which is not true. But Percy pieces all this together. He tells Hades, and Hades is like, oh, well, that sucks. I would like the Master Bolt now, then, and you can have your mother back. And Percy's like, well, no, I thought you didn't want the Master Bolt. And he's like, well, if we're going to war with Kronos, I'd like to have the Master Bolt then. So apparently he's like really afraid. Hades is particularly afraid of Kronos, I guess, which it seems he's even more afraid of Kronos than he is of Zeus, which is interesting. I don't even think he's afraid of Zeus necessarily. But that's the whole thing. And then we return. They use their pearls to get out. They're like, all right, we'll get you your helmet back. And then I'll come back for my mother, and you'll return her. They use their pearls to get out, which returns them to the ocean. But the final the final flashback, we return to that moment where Percy's mother, in the past, she uses another one of those like portable wish. I believe I don't know. She like lights a match and throws it into like an ice cream glass. It's some sort of like thing to summon the god, like it's an offering. I don't know, man. Who knows? It's something like that. Does that get explained ever? I don't know. Leave me alone, man. What am I supposed to understand that? I don't know. And then it starts raining outside. And then I was like, suddenly I had this like, I had a brain blast, much like Percy in this episode. But I had a brain blast, and I was like, it brought me back to that first episode where she was out sitting in the rain, and I'm like, that's a really weird, quirky thing to do. And then I'm like, oh, I can understand why you did that now. It's because the rain it's water, and Poseidon, it's his thing. He likes water a lot. He's like the god of it or something. It's a way that she can commune with him is through the rain, and I'm like, oh, suddenly that scene's not nearly as stupid. Which I just thought that scene was really dumb, but now I'm like, okay, it's not actually, that makes sense. No, I get it now. And so she meets Poseidon. It turns out, we find out that Poseidon is not actually neglecting Percy his whole life. He's actually kind of a good dude. He meets with the mother fairly regularly, but he doesn't meet with Percy. He never really, like, goes and talks to Percy directly. Percy's mother explained in this that she really wants to keep him outside of camp. She's really trying to keep him outside of this whole situation, to keep him safe for as long as possible, which is also part of the reason she didn't just take him to camp straight away. Kind of waits until a little too late to do it. But we meet Poseidon for the first time, and yeah, that whole thing happens. Still, I think she needs to parent Percy better. You can't just have a kid say something to you that like makes you cry. You discipline the child. Like, you don't let these kids. They say shitty things. They lack empathy. Okay, that's just what they do. You tell them to shut up. Okay. You take away their video games. Okay, so they can't play video games for a week because they said that. That hurt your feelings. You don't let it get to you. You don't show weakness. Okay. Episode 8. Okay, actually a lot happens in episode 8. Episode 8's crazy, okay? So we get a flashback to camp where we see that Percy trained swords with Luke at some point. Which is really weird to me because I did think the whole scene from like episode 2 where it's like, oh, every demigod has like a thing they're good at. I thought this was implying like this is the reason Percy's able to not only defeat the Minotaur, but he's able to defeat Clarisse when they're playing Capture the Flag. He's just a really good fighter. And I thought it was because that's his like talent, that's his like innate skill. You know, when they're going around and they're shooting the arrows and he's bad at that, and he's doing the blacksmithing and he's bad at the blacksmithing. You remember that scene? I assumed, oh, Percy's thing is that he's a good fighter, which explains why he's able to win those 2 battles so easily. But now we're getting a flashback scene where he's like sword training with Luke, and he sucks. And he sucks at fighting. And I'm like, wait a minute. How does he suck at fighting? What? When did this happen? How long has he been in camp that he could have learned to go from like really bad of a fighter to like really good of a fighter? If he had to learn to fight? He can't have been at camp that long, right? I don't think he was. How long was he at camp for? I assumed it was just like a couple days. Maybe a week. Maybe a month at most. Maybe a couple months. No, but they had only until the summer solstice, so that's halfway through the year. And if they go to the camp in like the spring, maybe it could have been a few months. I don't know. But you usually go to summer camp in the summer. and the summer solstice is like June, end of June. I don't know. I'm trying to I'm trying to figure all this out, but I just don't get it. Okay. And so they teleport. Okay, so we find out that whole thing. Luke says a bunch of stuff, which is going to reveal more about his character in the future. Ares shows up as soon as they arrive, and they teleport back. And Ares shows up. He's just there, waiting for them. Just another one of those things that I don't know if maybe there's some reason as to why this happens, but it's very convenient for them because, hey, what are they after? They're after Hades' helmet. And guess who has the helmet? Well, it's Ares, of course. And here he is, and they just have to beat him up and kill him. And then they can get the helmet back. He's just there. Why is he there? I don't know. I'm also really confused because if he has the helm, and we're going with the narrative that he is definitely the one that also gave them the bolt, like, again, it begs the question, like, why did he give them the bolt? Why did he give himself away so easily and quickly? And for no apparent reason. It turns out Ares is working for Kronos for some dumb reason. I don't know. He just wants a war, I guess. I honestly thought it was going to be kind of like a misdirection. Because I don't know if Ares... I don't think he flat out says he's doing this for Kronos. I believe he says something like, I don't do anything for other people. I only work for myself. Implying that he's not really admitting to it. So there could be some sort of flaw in the logic that Ares was being controlled by Kronos. And the only really other element of that is that we're assuming Clarisse was the lightning thief, which is not true, inevitably. So Ares doesn't have as much of a connection to the lightning thief either. I don't know. I don't really remember. He might flat out admit that he did do this. Or that he was the one to steal the bolt. I mean, he must have, because why else would it be in the bag? I don't know. And he also has the helm, so he must have been the one to steal the helm as well. So, like, clearly he was working for Kronos, right? I guess that is, like, an admission. It's basically just the fact that he definitely has the helm, right? Okay, so they defeat him. As I mentioned before, I mean, they kind of defeat him. I mean, Percy's, like, losing the fight, really. I don't know how he'd be able to go up against Ares and win, really. I'm not expecting him to be able to do that. But then this big wave comes and hits Ares. Clearly, Poseidon, like, intervening a little. Actually, I don't think it's Poseidon interfering. Sorry, I assumed a lot of the time that when the water came and did stuff, it was Poseidon. But I believe this is actually a power that Percy has to control water. He does have this ability. It's just weird that there's one time that he uses water, like the water, like when he's falling from the St. Louis Arch. I don't think that's him saving himself. It's definitely, at least I thought, it's Poseidon saving him. Yeah, he uses water to splash over Ares. And then he cuts his little heel, his like ankle, his like Achilles tendon. And then Ares just kind of gives up, I guess, at that point. Just a weird scene. I don't know. So, I mean, this does indicate to me, because I did have that question about the Celestial Bronze, if it actually is able to harm a god, and it seems like from this interaction that, yes, it most definitely can at least harm him. Whether or not that should have been enough to take out Ares, I mean, obviously didn't kill him, but, like, he does leave after that. He seems like he gets up and he stands on his legs. As if it's, like, not that bad. I don't know. So, I don't know. So, he leaves, and then he drops the helm, which I suppose he didn't really have to do, but he does. He leaves them the helm. And there is a line as he's dissipating. They say, don't look at his true form, as they hide their eyes. So, apparently, gods have, like, a true god form, and you're not allowed to look at it, or something bad will happen. It's just important information that I'm just putting in my brain, storing it away for later. Because I'm sure that's going to be something that I'm going to have to remember from this point sometime in the future, in like season 6. We're going to have to remember this. It also seems weird because most of the time the gods are not in their true form. Even when he goes to Olympus, even when he goes to the underworld, the gods are chilling in like a human suit, I guess. It's more convenient for them. And not just like, relaxing in their true forms. So, okay. Then there's a whole scene which I'm not crazy about. Which is them at this lake house, which I assume, actually, I'm not entirely 100% sure about this. I assumed this lake house was the house that Percy's mom takes him to in the first episode, but I'm feeling less confident about it now. Otherwise, it's just some random house, right? I don't know. So there's a light in the house, and we find out from a freaking there's like a radio that's playing, and it's playing this information like, oh, there's earthquakes going on all over the world. And it turns out, guess who shows up? But Mrs. Dodds. She clarifies Poseidon is using earthquakes to clear the skies. Whatever that means. And that's like what she says verbatim. I don't know how earthquakes clear skies. I don't know. But that's what she says, so he's doing that. So now there's earthquakes happening all over the world because of Poseidon, I guess. He's doing that. Mrs. Dodds is here. Question, because this was, something I got clarified to me on the rewatch of episodes 1 through 4. Clarification was, Mrs. Dodds, when she gets killed, she gets stabbed in episode 1. And then everybody forgets about her. This was like a pivotal, critical plot point. Everybody forgets about her existence. And she's just back now. She's not dead. What does it mean? I don't know. She's just back now. So, okay. It's a little frustrating, when I'm watching this and I was just remembering just having to rewatch episodes 1 through 4 and being like, oh, it makes sense now only on the rewatch because I paid attention to every little minute detail. And having to go through this and like pay attention to every minute detail and every like small little thing that was said at any point. It's a little frustrating. I think when my initial point was that the show doesn't really make any sense and it's hard to follow, I don't even think I was necessarily wrong about that. I think it was just maybe the way I went about the video is like, I said a bunch of stuff that was very clearly explained. I was like, I just went about it the wrong way. But it's like, I do feel like there's still, like, I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments that are like, actually, this was explained. But, like, this is so hard. I feel like, again, I would have to just rewatch these 4 episodes again and see if, like, there's big things I'm missing. But, like, I made sure to pay close attention this time around, okay? And it's like a full-time job having to watch this show, okay? I get so confused. And I'm like, you get bits of information that's not important until, like, 2 episodes from now, but it's like, it's critical that you remember it right now, despite the fact that these episodes air weekly. So it's like 2 weeks from now, you're going to have to remember this small detail. It's just a lot, man. It's a lot to ask of somebody. But it's like, I waited until all 4 of these episodes aired, and then I sat through them with my little notepad, and I wrote notes, and I rewinded when I needed to. And even then, even after doing that, there's still stuff that I don't fully understand. And this is where we're at, okay? I don't know. Why is Mrs. Dodds back? I don't know. Maybe the Furies just have the ability to come back. But then it's like, so what's the point in them being forgotten if they're, like, not really actually killable? Like, oh, but she's forgotten, though. Like, I don't know. It's strange. So we find out, obviously, she was sent to retrieve the helm, which is kind of stupid in hindsight, because we realize that at any point, the Furies could have been like, hey, do you have the helm, Hades' helm? And especially when the one Fury shows up to talk to them on the bus, she's like, well, Hades just wants to talk to you. And it's like, the implication is that Hades wants to ask him where the helm is when she could have just asked him where the helm was. She doesn't need to bring him to Hades to talk about where the helm is. She could just ask him if he has the helm and then take the helm back. Like, it just makes no sense that she'd want to take him to Hades. She doesn't need to do that. Like, if she's not intending on killing him and taking the helm in the first place, which seems like she's clearly not. But, like obviously, Percy knows that he has his mother, so he doesn't need to explain that, hey, I have your mother, and that's why you should just give me the helm back. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that doesn't make sense in hindsight, really. That makes that scene, like, less clear, right? Because there's, like, less information that needs to be conveyed. Hades doesn't need to talk to him. Like, it's a very specific thing that he's going to ask. It's like, he could just kill him if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to kill him for what reason? Annabeth gives Percy her little necklace. I wrote that down. That happens. It's got a little ring on it. I was having trouble remembering if there was any significance to this necklace that I could know of. And I couldn't think of anything. Like, it has a little ring on it. I don't know. I don't know, man. What's this ring? I don't know. There's probably something there, but I have no recollection of this ring, really. So there's another flashback where we talk to Luke again, and Luke says demigods can break rules and gods can't. So gods like to use demigods to, like, get around stuff and have battles and fight with each other, specifically to break rules because they can't break them themselves. And Percy says something about, like, why don't the demigods just, like, defeat the gods if, like, the demigods, like, if basically gods are afraid of demigods, what's the point? And Luke makes an analogy to spiders, where it's like, yeah, spiders, like, yeah, they're scary, but they're also really small, and so they're easy to kill. So, like, that's basically what demigods are to gods. I'm like, that's a good analogy. That makes sense to me. I understand what you're saying. Oh, God, this one's huge. Okay, so Zeus... Okay, so Percy goes to Olympus, okay? After they defeat Ares, they're like, I have to bring Master Bolt to Zeus to hopefully, like, stop this war from happening. I'm gonna be very brave and whatever. So we meet Zeus, and Zeus is played by Lance Reddick, of all people. And I was like, I was watching this, and I'm like, there's no way, right? Like, there's no way there's no way it was... So Lance Reddick's famous for... probably the John Wick movies. He plays, I believe, a character called Silas, I think, in the Horizon games, Horizon Zero Dawn. I played those. I remember him from that. He was also in the recent Resident Evil live-action series on Netflix. But the significant thing about this is that he passed away it wasn't even recently. It was sometime last year. And now realizing, I think when people... Like, I believe people were saying, like, the last thing Lance Reddick's gonna appear in was John Wick 4. Like, oh, this is his last movie. Last appearance. But now, turns out his last appearance is Percy Jackson and the Olympians, which I didn't... Did anybody know he was in this? I don't think anybody knew that. But I thought that was insane. I'm like, there's no way that's Lance Reddick. And so I look it up. I had to look this up. And it is. It's Lance Reddick. Unfortunately, Lance Reddick passed away last year. I mean, so obviously this is a character that's gonna have to, they're gonna have to recast him, which is this very not positive subject matter, but I don't know. I can't, like, not mention this information, right? I can't, like, move past this and just, like, ignore the fact. But I do love Lance Reddick. I do think it's a very small amount of time that he's in the show. He did a good job. He's got this voice, man, this very powerful, commanding voice, which really works for the character. So Zeus accepts the Master Bolt, and he also accepts this information that Kronos is trying to come back. And so he allows Percy to leave on the basis that, oh, you gave me this information. But then Percy pushes his luck a lot by basically getting mad at him and saying, your family sucks, everybody's always fighting all the time, they don't even like you, they're just scared of you. And he's trying to get Zeus to, like, call off this war, where Zeus really wants to have this war with Poseidon. And then Zeus takes the Master Bolt, and he's about to, like, kill Percy. And then Poseidon shows up and stops him, and then also basically surrenders. So the war is technically stopped. They do stop the war, because Poseidon just instantly loses it. Like, that's it. Short war. It happened. It's over. But we're kind of resolving at least that issue of, like, well, there's a war starting up. It's not going to happen now. That's not to say war isn't inevitable. It's something they keep saying over the course of this show. Zeus loves wars. They're about due for a war, and that was kind of a lame one, so probably going to want to have another war at some point. But it's not like people don't believe that Percy, when he says that Kronos is back, they do all seem to buy into that information. And they're like, well, we're probably going to have to fight Kronos then. So yeah, so that's a whole thing. We're looking for the future of the television show, what's going to happen later on, predictions. Things are not going to go well. I think there's going to be a lot of battles and a lot of wars. In this conversation, Zeus basically says that everybody knows, so there's no point in, like, keeping this a secret. Everybody basically knows Kronos. He lists specifically Ares, Hades, and Hermes all know about Kronos. I don't know how Hermes knows about it. That was the only one I was like, how does Hermes know? But then Poseidon's like, so everyone? And he's like, yeah. And so I guess it doesn't matter, because he's basically just saying, okay, so if they know, then everybody knows. So we return back to camp, and I'm kind of surprised at this point that the show is still going. I think they had like half of the episode still left here, because they go back to camp. And everybody cheers on Percy, and he gets a hug from Annabeth, and then they have, like, Annabeth says something like, oh, well, don't look at Clarice, we can't let her know that we know that she's the lightning thief, she has a bunch of supporters or whatever, so we can't reveal that information, we have to keep it from her. And so they're implying that they're going to have to do this whole thing at camp, where they, I don't know. I imagine in the book maybe this is more of a significant thing, but she says something about, like, how they're gonna have to, like, keep it a secret so that they can, like, foil her plan or whatever, which they don't end up doing, because we find out that Clarice was not the lightning thief in the end. Big spoiler. This is the big spoiler of the series. The betrayer of the series. And again, this was another thing that I was thinking up. Okay, part of the prophecy is that one of Percy's friends is going to betray him, and I had this in mind the whole show, even up to this point. I'm like, well, we're well beyond the point where we went to the underworld. I'm like, we're back, and nobody betrayed him. Like, it wasn't Grover, it wasn't Annabeth. So I'm like, there's gonna be somebody else to betray him. And the moment we start having this scene with Luke, I'm like, oh, it's, who else would it be? He's the only other friend that, like, we know at all, right? I don't think there's any other character. Like, Clarice isn't a friend. It's like, oh, Luke is going to betray. I feel like probably plays better in the books, just because maybe he gets more, like, time to, like, develop as a character and, like, be interesting. But I feel like in this, he barely does anything. Like, he explains a bunch of stuff, and then we, like, leave him, and then he's not in the rest of it. He just explains stuff. He's, like, barely a character, you know, barely, like, a human being. And he spends a lot of time in this episode just explaining more stuff. So I don't really think the twist is, like, great or satisfying, really, just because, like, I don't know. I'm not that much hurt by the fact that Luke is the betrayer. It's like, doesn't hurt me all that much. I'm like, man, Grover would have been crazier, though, you know? Like, that would have been a crazier reveal. But, yeah, so... And the big clue to this, and the reason why I said the shoes being sucked into the hole was explained in Episode 8, because it's explained here. The reason the shoes fly into the Tartarus hole is because Luke gave him the shoes specifically to do that. They were specifically supposed to pull him into the hole into Tartarus. But he didn't expect that he would give the shoes to Grover. But even if he hadn't given the shoes to Grover, I don't know if it would have, like, pulled them into the hole definitively. Like maybe Grover would have saved him, but no, he saves Grover. Doesn't matter. But Luke pulls out his sword and he's like, "Wait, I just wanted to show you my sword." And then he says like the name of the sword. I rewound it twice. I don't know what the heck the name of the sword was. I wasn't about to. Let me look up the name of his sword. Backbiter. Oh god, there's spoiler information. Okay, look away. Shoot. He says, "Hey, here's my sword. It can open secret doors, and we can go and hide." And it turns out that Luke was feeding Percy a lot of this information. Probably a lot of his disdain for the gods and their ways probably came from Luke, I'm sure. But he's like, yeah, the gods suck. Let's go to war with the gods. But it's also implied that he's working for Kronos, who I guess wants the same thing, but like Luke believes Kronos is better, even though he hates the gods just generally. Why is Kronos better? Why would Kronos be better? I don't know. What is it about Kronos that really speaks to him? That's what I want to know. Then Annabeth shows up, which I think is really funny. She's basically like takes off her invisibility suit. She throws a knife at him, at Luke. She's like, "I heard everything." And then Luke escapes through the portal. I think it's just really funny because it implies that like Annabeth was basically like just being like a creepy stalker. She like followed them into the woods during these fireworks just to like stare at them while invisible. I'm like, what? Like, what other purpose does she have for being here? Unless she anticipated that Luke was a bad guy the whole time. End of the episode. Lots of things happening. Actually, we're setting up for a lot of things. Annabeth's basically going back to visit her father. How does she not? She implies she doesn't know what Disney World is. She's like, "Oh, I think it's like something like Waterworld," referring to that episode where they went to the amusement park. And she's like, "I think it's like that." I'm like, how can a person not? How can she not know what Disney World is? How does she not? How does she know what the St. Louis Arch is? But she's never heard of Disney World. What? It's like, it's a weird line. It's like, it makes sense for somebody that's like been sheltered their entire life and hasn't lived in the real world, but she has. She has literally lived in the real, like, I don't know what the implication here is, because it doesn't make sense. Like, what is she? It's not like she lived in like another world, like she's coming out of Narnia, right? It's like somebody coming out of Narnia, I wouldn't expect them to know what Disney World is. But she knows what New York City is. She knows what, she's been to San Francisco, Missouri. How do you not know what Disney World is? Anyways, I don't know. The line stood out to me. I'm like, this is stupid. Grover becomes a searcher. He gets a little flower pin. So he's moving up, and we feel good for him, and we're happy for him. So Percy goes back to the beach house, thinking like, oh, I gotta see if my mom's back. He leaves camp, by the way. Everybody leaves camp. They say something about like, Dionysus shows up and says something about like everybody that's not staying for the fall term. I believe he says fall term or something like that. Which like, what the heck? Like, they have, it's like a school, right? Fall term? Is that what he says? Because I did rewind it. I don't know what he said. I think he said something like fall term, which implies that there's like terms, which implies that like you can stay at the camp all year long, and it's like a school basically. Percy goes to the beach house, and his mom shows up, but then it like transitions into a weird scene where Kronos shows up, and he says like, your survival, okay, important line, your survival is the key to my return, is what Kronos says. Okay, Kronos, I'm sure that's gonna be true, just like that time when the fates implied that somebody was gonna die, and it didn't happen. Nobody died. Anyways, yeah, it's just weird because it like the transition was like, oh, this was a dream, but it turns out the mom actually is back, and that did happen. But the transition to the other scene was like a dream of him remembering that, but it happens differently. Kind of an odd way to do that, but that is what happened. We know that Percy should still be, like, probably the cops are, like, after him. I would assume the same for Annabeth, because she was, like, part of this whole thing. She was also on the train with Percy. It's like, Annabeth and Grover should both probably also be on the run from the police. She's going to Disney World, I guess. It's going to Disney World, and I'm sure she'll be perfectly safe there. But I think they have to, like, be on the run. Basically, the last thing that happens in this, Percy and his mother leave the New York apartment to go somewhere new, somewhere else. They're going somewhere. They're exiting. They're leaving. And then there's a little after-credits scene of the stepdad showing up back at the thing. And I just kind of assumed he was just, like, obviously they were going to break up. And he just wasn't going to show up anymore. But no, they do bring him back in the final episode it turns out he tries to get in. She's changed the locks so he can't get in. And then, you know, when they send the Medusa head to Olympus, the gods sent it back, and then it ends up at Percy's doorstep, and the stepdad looks in the box, and he gets turned to stone. So that happened in the kind of after credits scene. Which it means, I guess we're not going to see this stepdad again. He's just going to be a statue in front of the door. It's kind of a weird way to write a character out. But I don't know. Is that how it happens in the book as well? It's an after credits scene. It's like an epilogue where the dad looks at the Gorgon head and turns into a stone statue and then is never heard from again. But him turning to stone doesn't mean that he didn't, go on the news and tell everybody what a bad kid Percy was and that he's evil and needs to be chased. So I assume that plot point is going to carry over. But I could be wrong. I don't know. If it's not, I'm going to feel really weird about it. That's Percy Jackson, man. This show is... Honestly, I like the show, okay? I like it, and I feel like the longer it goes on, I'm hoping the less I have to, really, invest 100% of my attention into it to, understand what's going on. A lot of the lore dump happens in this season. We're gonna hope in the later seasons it's not such a chore to try to comprehend. But yeah, I think that is sort of a big problem with it. I do think, for somebody like me that's not a fan of the books, or I should say hasn't read the books is how I should phrase that more so, I really think this is a tricky watch for anybody that hasn't read the books, because a lot of context and information is really thrown out very quickly. Every couple of seconds there's some new piece of information, and if you miss some of this small stuff, a lot of the it has this butterfly effect, where you start not being able to understand the bulk of what's happening, because this is important to understanding this, and that's important to understanding that, and that's important to understanding that. There's so many things that build off each other, so it's tough. You really have to pay attention. I am just saying this is not typically how I watch television shows. Okay, I do split my attention a lot of the time, or I do sometimes I get distracted, maybe I get up to go get a drink or something, and I come back, and I'm not immediately back into the thing, but it's I have to glue my eyes to the television to watch this show. And there were a lot of people, I feel that were oh, my kid brother can follow this and you can't. I'm man, I don't feel that's fair at all. I don't think if you have a kid brother hasn't read the books and is watching this and he's I understand what's going on, it's because he's a child and don't necessarily have critical thinking skills yet, which I think is very important to be able to actually understand the show. You have to be able to question certain things, how'd they get this thing? Where'd this thing come from? Where's this information? This doesn't make sense. How does this character fit into this? It's they're not thinking about any of that. A 6-year-old, they're not thinking about that stuff. It's of course they're gonna say they understand it. They're watching Sesame Street. They watch Elmo, and he's it's, of course they don't have to follow it at all. I think it's difficult to follow. And I think anybody that hasn't read the books is going to have a really hard time with this. And I will say, from an action standpoint, yes, if you're not like trying to follow the plot line, there's stuff that happens. It's fun. I just find it really difficult. I don't know how else to say it. So yeah, if there's a second season, I'll probably stick around and watch a second season. If people want me to do a video about a second season, inevitably, I will look into doing that. But now we're at the point where I just want to be a little meta, because this is like technically supposed to be a podcast. I'm gonna try to do this like weekly, and it's gonna be more of a podcast format. And I do kind of want to just like maybe do an episode where I just talk about something that's not a show, and just maybe be a little bit more meta and just have a conversation about something I want to talk about. So I'm going to try to do that for next week. I'm going to try to make this a weekly thing, which, by the way, I've been like really slacking on uploads recently. It's because I was very busy last month, and I just didn't have a lot of time to do anything. So that's why a lot of stuff just kind of took a really long time. I meant to put that Echo episode out like a lot earlier than I did. Like I watched it literally, I think, the day it came out. I watched the whole series, and I was gonna just record it that day. The thing was, I waited a few weeks to like record it, and then I waited even longer to like finish editing the thing together. So it took way longer to come out. I think I put it out like last week or last weekend. I don't know, sometime recently, but this one should come out relatively quicker. But I know the show ended a little while back. Its problem was I was not even within this state, I think, when the show actually ended. So I don't want to elaborate too much on that, but yeah. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you want me to do moving forward. If there's some sort of topic you'd like me to talk about, you have ideas, thoughts, I will listen. I realize this podcast was only really... I've only really continued it because the first Percy Jackson episode actually got a lot of attention. There's kind of a lot riding on these Percy Jackson episodes. And if it doesn't, if people don't care as much, it's fine. It'll clarify my decision on whether or not I keep making these and at what rate. But like I said, I do want to at least make an episode for next week. So, all right, goodbye.